weekday, Monday through Friday. Lots to get to, tons of guests, breaking news, scoops, every single show here on Fancred. My name is Brooks Melchior, and we're live in Los Angeles. As you can see behind me, a depiction of the Los Angeles Coliseum. Not really the Los Angeles Coliseum, especially when you see those, it looks like kind of drapery or something. But hey, it's okay. All right, we're on a no-frills budget here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred because we're going to get to sports. We're going to talk to you about things you don't know about, like the University of Tennessee. I mentioned this a second ago on Twitter. I've got new information about Jeremy Pruitt and the Tennessee football program, which obviously is a dumpster fire, and Jeremy Pruitt probably not going to make it. When you look at their schedule, I would say after this season, when you look at the offense of Tennessee against Florida on Saturday, Jeremy Pruitt, defensive coach, has his fingers in the offensive pie, doesn't seem to want to stop. They've already lost to Georgia State, already lost to BYU. They've got an impossible schedule. They've got teams like Alabama and Georgia still coming up. Of course, they've got a winnable game theoretically against Mississippi State as well. But Jeremy Pruitt probably not going to make it. And coming up here in a second, I'm going to talk New England Patriots with Chris Gasper of the Boston Globe. So if I don't quite get to exactly what I'm going to get to, as far as Tennessee goes, I want you to hang with me. Stay with me, Tennessee fans. Stay with me, SEC fans. But first, we're going to go out to Boston, and we're going to talk to a guy who has his hand on the pulse of the New England Patriots and has had so for many, many years. Chris Gasper, Boston Globe columnist, host on the Sports Hub in Boston. How you doing?
Good. How are you, Brooks?
I am doing great. And can you remember, and you've covered the Patriots for a long time, I know you've covered the beat as well. Can you remember as eventful like a month as what we've had with the New England Patriots of late?
Yeah, I would say for me, the one that stands out would be 2007, just Spygate, that whole month of what was going on. Obviously, it started in the season opener with the Jets, pulling the Patriots employee off the sidelines. But that's the last time I remember this much sort of off the.
And you had a great team then, too.
Same thing. It's similar.
Right.
So parallel there, Brooks, between 07 and this team, because this is a great, great team. There's no question about that. And I think that when you look at it, this is one of those situations the Patriots thrive on in terms of they're just going to batten down the hatches and play football and say everybody's against us and everybody wants us to lose.
And of course they do.
Yeah.
Outside of that's funny because normally it's a manufactured thing. Not anymore. Not for Boston. Not for Boston teams. We absolutely want you to lose.
Yeah, somehow they'll turn it into they're being persecuted here, not that they signed a guy they
right.
never signed.
Right. And speaking of Antonio Brown, I'm sure a lot of Pats fans are thinking the moment Brown goes away, Edelman gets hurt. I know they're different types of receivers, different positions, but what's the story on Julian Edelman first? What's his status?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, look, I know they did x-rays on him and he left with a chest injury, and that's pretty much all I know, really at this point. The Patriots keep it pretty tight with injuries. I can say Jules is really a tough guy, so let's see what happens during the week, whether he's out there practicing. I think if he's missing time, that's an indication that this is a more serious injury because there's not a lot of stuff that's going to knock him out. Normally when he's been out, like the last time they had a team that looked this good at the start of the year, I'd say it was 2015. They won the first 10 games. Well, he got knocked out. He broke his foot against the Giants at MetLife Stadium. It takes that type of injury normally to keep him out of the lineup for a sustained period of time. So obviously it would be a huge loss. I mean, that's Tom Brady's top target. It's his football soulmate. It's his BFF. So if that guy's not there and you don't have Antonio Brown, that's even more stress, I think, on the wide receiving core.
What happened with Antonio Brown? Why did they release him?
Yeah, I think it was driven, Brooks, by ownership. I think there were some reservations from the beginning with ownership, and it was a situation where Bill Belichick kind of went to bat for Antonio Brown and also really sort of went to bat for himself and said, look, I believe in my system and our structure. And if somebody here is serious about focusing on football and wanting to focus on football, and that means more to them than money and fame, then I feel like I can integrate them and it will work. And I think there were reservations all along. And when those text messages were made public, where it seems like he's harassing or threatening or trying to intimidate
The children.
Children. And that was one that really, I think, crossed the line for a lot of people in the organization. And I think, I'll say this, I know it's sort of been portrayed as a unanimous decision. And I think it was in the end. But why did Bill Belichick practice him on Friday if he was thinking he wasn't going to be on the team on Sunday? I think Bill looked at it and saw, okay, it's 2 versus 1. And the 2 people who are against me, Robert Kraft, the owner, and team president Jonathan Kraft, they signed my checks. I'm not going to win this one. And I think he reluctantly came to the place of cutting this guy because the Patriots were fully invested in Antonio Brown from a football ops standpoint.
Visiting with Chris Gasper, the Boston Globe, also a sports radio host on the Sports Hub 98.5 in Boston. I thought it was really striking when you look at the tweets that Antonio Brown did put out yesterday, and then, of course, he subsequently deleted, that Robert Kraft was a target of Antonio Brown, but none of the Patriots, including Belichick, was.
Oh, that's a really good point. I had not thought of it from that, perspective. Now, look, the reason I think Robert Kraft's a target, I'm not sure that it's Antonio saying, hey, Robert Kraft is the reason I'm not on the team. I think somehow on Sunday morning, Antonio was watching NFL Countdown or whatever he was watching, NFL Game Day on NFL Network. And he's like, wait, I'm not going to get my money. They're not going to pay me. I think it dawned on him that they're going to fight him for this $9 million of bonus money that was in the deal that he signed with them. And I think that's what enraged him. Because you look at the tweets he sent, obviously he made it personal with Robert Kraft and the reference to the solicitation charges that Robert Kraft is facing down in South Florida. But we was talking about owners being able to, disavow guarantees. And he said, I almost 40 million. So that's going back to the 30 million of the Raiders. So I think it was the money part that set Antonio Brown off. And once he got set off, man, he wasn't about to stop.
Yeah, and I've heard some media members talk about how that may impact this situation in terms of a possible settlement with the Patriots. Is it possible that the tweets that he sent out may preclude him from getting any of that guaranteed money, or was he never going to get it in the first place?
I think that it could preclude him. I think the Patriots would have been amenable before to some sort of settlement here. I don't think they wanted to pay him the full $9 million of the signing bonus. Obviously, his base salary was $1 million guaranteed. I don't think they wanted to pay him the full $10 million, but I think they would have cut a deal with him, especially if they could have gotten salary cap credit. But now he made it personal, and now this is going to be a fight to the death, and it will ultimately be up to an arbitrator or somebody to determine whether he gets the money or not. I can't see Robert Kraft cutting this guy any check after he made it.
I can't. Well, I think Robert Kraft is going to take the Orchids of Asia thing to the Supreme Court if he has to. He's that kind of a guy. And I think we saw Bill Belichick side with Robert Kraft when push came to shove when it came to the release.
What choice did he have, though?
Right, exactly. Well, that's kind of the whole point. He signed. It's like you said, he's signing the checks. But I think the way that Robert Kraft is fundamentally, definitively, extensively fighting this Orchids of Asia thing to the bitter end. I mean, I think it gives you, and you know better about this guy certainly than I do, but I think it gives you a window into what kind of a person he is, and he's resolute. And so I would be very surprised if Antonio Brown gets any money from the Patriots. It's blood from a turnip now. And so when you look at the Patriots situation, and of course, so far this season, kind of hard to say how good they are, even though they look extremely good, especially on defense. But what about the offense? What about the offensive line? You might have a problem at receiver, potentially with Edelman, maybe not. But tell us about this offense and where it stands, because it still is or is it an unknown quantity?
Well, I mean, the interesting thing is, and look, they've gotten help from the defense, certainly against Miami with the 43 points, but they've topped 30 points in every game they played this year, all three. So, and we're still asking questions about the offense. I think they're still trying to find their identity and what they're going to be at the end of the day. The running game has.
Visiting with Chris Gasper of the Boston Globe. Go ahead, Chris.
Sorry. That's been an issue for them. The running game hasn't been there with Sony Michel. And we'll see what they are with the pass catchers. I can tell you this. They're really high on Josh Gordon. And Josh Gordon was a big part of the offense last year when they made the trade with Cleveland. He was really, really good. averaging, I think it was about 18 yards a catch. So they still feel like they have a dynamic number one type guy on the outside in Josh Gordon, even with Antonio Brown gone. At the end of the day, they'll make the best out of what they have, whether it's James White, Rex Burkhead, Sony Michel, the running backs, that group strong, whatever receivers they have, they'll make it work, because that's what they did last year. I mean, that offense was not that great, but they found a way in the postseason, and that's what Josh McDaniels and Bill Belichick tend to do. They maximize what they have.
Visiting with Chris Gasper of the Boston Globe. He has covered the Patriots for a long time. Tell us about that defense and why that defense is so good this year.
Yeah, I think it starts on the back end. I mean, they're a talented veteran group in the secondary. Stephon Gilmore, you can make a case, is the best corner in the game. Jason McCourty's a veteran corner on the other side. They just gave Jonathan Jones, the nickel corner, a big extension. And then the safety, Patrick Chung and Devin McCourty. Those guys have been around for a while and played at a high level. And so they're very good when it comes to disguise. They're all sort of multiple guys. They can cover different types of players and do different types of things. And you don't have a strong safety, free safety. You can drop Devin in the box and drop Patrick Chung back. Patrick Chung tends to play more in the box, but he can cover as well. So I think it's all that versatility. And then the linebacker group, getting Jamie Collins back has been huge for them. Jamie Collins, I think, has come back here and is more appreciative of being with the Patriots in terms of the opportunity to win after being in Cleveland. And it makes it easier when you got paid. He got his money in Cleveland. He's wiser. He's richer. He's happier than he was the first time he was here. And he has played at an extremely high level through these first 3 games. He had 2 sacks on Sunday, had the pick 6 against Miami in week 2. He's been a difference maker for them at that linebacker level. They're really strong there with Collins, Van Noy, Dante Hightower. So you sort of look at it, the secondary, the linebacker group, they're just a veteran, talented group that can do a lot of different things. It's sort of like Belichick's the mad scientist. He can come up with stuff, and no matter what he throws at these guys, they can execute it.
It's interesting. I hear this somewhat from the Boston media, but I don't hear much of it nationally. What about the prospect, especially if the Patriots are able to run the table, and God knows that's a very difficult prospect, but what about the possibility that this could be Bill Belichick's last year?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really thought too much about that, Brooks. I think the pendulum's kind of swung the other way. There was a time when he was like, hey, I'm not going to be Marv Levy out here on the sideline at 70 years old. But now it seems like it's going the other way, where there's no end in sight.
Is that his son? Tell us about his son and his role.
Yeah, I mean, his son, both of his sons are on the coaching staff. His son, Steven, is the safeties coach. And then his son, Brian, is a coaching assistant here. And Steve Belichick, along with Gerard Mayo, is essentially, running the defense. And so I think Bill's enjoying that. And really, I look at this almost like sort of with Tom Brady and Jimmy Garoppolo. Tom hung around long enough to sort of outlast Jimmy G. It feels like Belichick's going to hang around long enough to outlast somebody like Josh McDaniels and in terms of a succession plan for the Patriots.
What about the idea that he sticks around long enough where selling Steve Belichick as the head coach is a possibility? And Josh McDaniels perhaps moves on, but Steve Belichick becomes a legitimate head coaching candidate. So Bill holds on long enough for that to happen.
Yeah, I know people have sort of theorized that, and I just don't see that necessarily happening at this point. I mean, Steve Belichick doesn't have enough experience, and I think the Crafts will ultimately make that decision where they want to go. I'm not sure they would say, hey, Bill, you were the greatest coach of all time for us, so we're just going to put your son in as the next coach. I'm not necessarily sure that's the way it would go. I think someone like Josh McDaniels would be a lot more likely to succeed him, but it's weird. I mean, again, it's kind of changed. A few years ago, I would have been like, yeah, definitely, Bill's going to dial it back, and I don't know how much longer he's going to coach. But now it seems like he's sort of in it for the long haul, but you never know with him. That's the thing. I mean, he could be acting like he's in it for the long haul, and then if they win a 7th, he says, I'm done.
We're visiting with Chris Gasper. Chris, one more thing for you. I'm assuming you saw the Dana Jacobson interview involving Bill Belichick and the icy stare that she got, and he didn't answer the last question. And what were your thoughts on that? And what has been your personal experience in dealing with Belichick over the years?
Yeah, I've been on the other end of that icy glare more than once, and he's not shy about expressing his displeasure. I think good for Dana. That's a question that has to be asked. And my philosophy.
She did. You know what, Chris? She did a perfect perfect job on that, I thought.
No, I would agree with you. I mean, I thought she was extremely professional, and she prefaced it by saying she has to ask the question, which she did.
Exactly.
Bill's
She
really
boxed
big
him
on
in.
Bill's really big on do your job. Well, guess what? We have a job to do too, right? And so, if you don't like answering questions about Antonio Brown, don't bring him in. Bill has a saying that he repeats: bring a player in, you get everything that comes along with him. And that's height, weight, speed, attitude, whatever. Well, in this case, it was a lot of baggage. So if you didn't want to deal with that baggage, then don't bring the guy in. So I thought Dana, Bill doesn't want to answer those questions, which is his right. I get that. But I think you can't let him intimidate you out of asking valid and pertinent questions. And that question was both valid and pertinent.
Well, I'm thinking now, as you say that, I may steal that from you on Twitter when you do it in the context of Bill Belichick saying, do your job. And then maybe you put the video right underneath it of Dana doing her job with Bill Belichick.
I like it. I look forward to seeing that on Twitter.
Yeah, I'll send you a percentage. All right. You'll wet your beak on it, though. All right. Chris, I can't thank you enough. Thanks for dropping by.
Thanks for having me, Brooks. Appreciate it.
That's Chris Gasper. He is a sports radio host on 98.5, the Sports Hub, and of course, longtime fixture at the Boston Globe, covering the New England Patriots. He's also a Boston Globe columnist at large as well. And there's no better person to talk to when it comes to someone. I mean, we've talked to a lot of great people who've been around. When I say no better, there's a tier of individuals. We talked to Tom Curran a while ago. We'll have him back on, hopefully on Sports by Brooks on Fancred, and others who continue to cover the Patriots on a day-to-day basis in Boston. They're just around in Foxborough and whatnot. And certainly Chris Gasper is at the very top of that list in that group. And that's what we bring to you every single day, along with information you can't get anywhere else. And I hope there's some Tennessee fans that have tuned in. There's some SEC fans. There's some college football fans, because I'm about to name names, dish a little bit, and let you know what's going on within that Tennessee football program that has not been reported, and outside of this show will probably not be reported until it actually happens, until it actually is consummated. And that is when it comes to Jeremy Pruitt, it's increasingly inevitable that the current Tennessee football coach is going to be fired. When you look at their schedule, when you look at their performance on Saturday, I think that was somewhat of a defining performance for Pruitt as you gauge his progress or lack thereof, especially on the offensive side of the ball, especially when you look at the quarterback position. Clearly, Tennessee is not where at least the fans and the media expect it to be. Now, I'm a Georgia fan, and I try to be unbiased, but as just putting my Georgia fan hat on, if you're an Alabama fan, if you're a Mississippi State fan, obviously I don't give a damn about. I'm completely a disinterested third party, whether it's as a fan or whether it's as a media member. That's where I'm coming from on this Tennessee information. But I will tell you this, for Tennessee fans that are out there that are watching this right now, I can tell you that Peyton Manning, who is as prominent an alumnus, literally, and that includes the likes of Jimmy Haslam, that includes the likes of Jimmy Sexton, super agent for CAA. Peyton Manning has taken the bull by the horns here. And it's funny when you think about the name of his current show on ESPN Plus is called Peyton's Places. Well, that's somewhat playing out in the background, right, behind the scenes as we speak, as Peyton Manning has been doing his homework, doing his due diligence to try to set up his alma mater in the event that Jeremy Pruitt is fired by the University of Tennessee. And Phil Fulmer, the AD, who himself is on shaky ground, has signed off and is participating in this situation where Fulmer and Manning working together to try to build a list of potential candidates. And I can tell you right now, 100% Tennessee fans, Peyton Manning is actively engaged, directly involved in that contemplative process and in that connective process, not with potential coaches directly, but potentially with people who are around those coaches. I'm talking about possible replacements for Jeremy Pruitt. Now, one of the problems that you have, and I've talked about this in depth and in length over the past week or so, is that Tennessee's as an attractive head coaching prospect for some of the top candidates in the country is not a good job anymore. It just isn't. It really doesn't matter. I mean, certainly the money matters. And certainly Tennessee's got a lot of it. And certainly whoever goes in there is going to get paid a representative amount. A lot of it depends on who they get. But who are they really going to get? Let me put it this way. Think about somebody like James Franklin. James Franklin, of course, coached at Vanderbilt. Now he's at a top-tier program. Certainly you could classify Penn State as somewhat of an elite program, maybe just in the 1A position when it comes to elite programs. You have Ohio State, you have Michigan, and then maybe you place a Penn State and a Michigan State, among other schools perhaps, in the Big Ten in that position. But James Franklin, it's clear that James Franklin wants to move on from Penn State. That's what some people are telling me, some of my sources, and that's no secret. It's not like it's breaking news. He's a guy who is a huge self-promoter and who is interested in moving on and moving up. And unfortunately for Tennessee, right now, that program does not represent a move up for a James Franklin, even though he's a guy who was recruited in that region and had tremendous success at Vanderbilt at the expense of Tennessee. James Franklin's not interested in the Tennessee job. James Franklin's interested in the USC job. Is that a possibility? As we move away from Tennessee for a moment, absolutely it is. David Jones, who is a fixture in the media in covering Penn State, David Jones of the Harrisburg Patriot News, and has covered that team for decades, wrote a long piece in the offseason about the possibility that James Franklin may move on, not only move on, but may go to USC. And I'm going to give you a little intel about USC and that coaching search that I haven't talked a whole lot about. I haven't mentioned it, I don't think, on Twitter yet. But when it comes to the USC coaching job, number one, understand that victory over Utah, all right, that's window dressing. That's kind of icing on the cake. That's not something that's going to get Clay Helton another year. You know, first of all, there's a long way to go. They can lose a lot more games. And they've got, at least in the context of the Pac-12, a schedule that's not all that easy. When you got to go to Washington, that's about as tough as it gets. I mean, besides maybe a road game at Oregon these days, Washington is about as tough a game. They dispatched BYU with relative ease last Saturday, something, of course, USC wasn't able to do. BYU beat USC. So now USC, the Trojans and Clay Helton, it was a nice win over Utah. I might add, the stadium was, I don't know, it was about 60% full, something like that, at the Coliseum. That's a major problem, number one. All right, that's a problem. It was a bad crowd, especially when you consider the circumstances of FS1 being on the scene with Fox. You had this incredible situation with Urban Meyer, who I'm going to address coming up if I have a chance later in the show. We've got more guests coming up, and we're going to primarily talk NFL with guests today. We'll get into more college football with guests tomorrow and throughout the week. You know, we do it all. We do whatever is relevant, whatever is interesting, that's engaging, that's exciting, that's proprietary. But when it comes to USC, that victory over Utah, you had everything going on. Of course, you had the Reggie Bush situation, which is somewhat unprecedented. Lots of excitement on Friday for a lot of people. But if you're inside the USC program, I'm not talking about people who are participating in that football program. I'm talking about administration, trustees, former alumni, football alumni at USC who have juice in the process. And there are 2 or 3 guys right now who have juice in the process right now. They shall remain unnamed at this time. You're not excited about the win over Utah. Not that big of a deal because you're big, bad USC. You're a legacy program. You're an elite blue blood program, and you are. So it's all fine and good to beat Utah. Great. But we got to go to Washington. And if you get embarrassed by Washington, if you get beat by Washington by over 5 touchdowns, I'm not so sure Clay Helton is going to have a job in the bye week. Then you've got a bye week. Then you've got to go to Notre Dame. And I'm not really sure about Notre Dame right now. after the Georgia game, and that's something that I'd like to address before the end of the week as we talk football. I'm a Georgia Bulldog. I was a walk-on place kicker at Georgia for 5 years, in case you don't know. But I want to get into that later as we get closer to Notre Dame and as I have time later in the week. I'm focused on USC here, and that's after the bye week. But when you look at the Washington game specifically, and I'm going to double back here to James Franklin in a second. That's why I'm getting into that job. All right. You've got to go to Washington. That's a very, very difficult game. That's about as tough a game as you're going to get on the schedule, besides playing at Oregon, as I already said. So if you get beat by over 5 touchdowns and you're Clay Helton, and I'm not saying it's going to happen, it probably won't. You're probably not going to make it to Notre Dame. Now, bring in the possibility of a guy like James Franklin, who I was just talking about, from Penn State. And a big article from David Jones. And make a note of David Jones, our producer, Cam Smith in Boston. Cam, make a note. We need to get in touch with David Jones. He is the preeminent expert, for my money, not only on Penn State right now, but in the context of the past. And God knows it's an ugly past. But he's a guy who knows where the bodies are buried, forgive me, right, at Penn State. Yikes, that takes on a whole new meaning, unfortunately, sadly, tragically. We're going to try to get him on and talk to him about James Franklin, all right? Because I'm going to give you a little nugget here. I'm going to give you a little nugget about SC and James Franklin. I know I have learned from multiple sources that an African-American coach is a priority, not just a priority. It's an imperative. It's an imperative as far as the administration is concerned at USC, and prominent football alumni who actually have juice in the process. Who are those football alumni involved in the process? One thing to always look for, if you want to know who has juice at USC, look at the Board of Trustees, and I'll leave it at that. Not going to name names directly right now, but when it comes to the football alumni at USC, hiring USC's first African-American football coach is a priority, and I don't think anybody would say that's a bad thing, so long as the candidate is a representative candidate, is someone who would do a good job. Now you say, well, you've got Urban Meyer sitting out there. I'm going to start it right now. What's the day? September 23rd. It's 12:30 Eastern time, Monday. Remember this. Urban Meyer is not going to take the USC job. All right. I've decided to take the plunge. I'm holding my nose. I'm doing a cannonball into the pool, the coaching carousel swimming pool. Urban Meyer is not going to USC. All right. You know where he's going. This is a prediction. I don't have a crystal ball, but I'm going to take a shot. Right. Old takes exposed, right? Freezing cold takes. But if I had to guess where Urban Meyer ends up in the future, an educated guess would be Notre Dame. Well, Brian Kelly's there. They're coming off a great effort. They probably lost their way, failed their way into the college football playoff with that victory over USC. With that loss, wishful thinking, right? They've got USC in 2 weeks. With the loss to Georgia, Brian Kelly probably ensured Notre Dame a spot in the college football playoff. I want you to pull up Notre Dame's schedule. Pull it up on the internet. Take a look at it. Let's take a look at it right now. The Notre Dame football schedule, the rest of the season. When I say they made the college football playoff with that great performance, especially for Notre Dame in the context of recent history, great performance by Notre Dame at Georgia. Let's take a look at the rest of the Notre Dame schedule and in the context of Notre Dame making the playoffs. All right. Who do they have next? Virginia at home. Who do they have after that? One of the worst teams in human history in the Western Hemisphere, Bowling Green. Then who does Notre Dame play? They've got USC at home. Then they go to Michigan. Michigan, for you Michigan fans out there. That's an inside joke. Michigan, right? Notre Dame goes to Michigan, October 26th. Obviously, Michigan not playing well right now. That's something that we should talk about, Jim Harbaugh, before the end of the day or this week. In fact, we need to look at getting somebody on, I think, from Michigan as well. Cam Smith, our producer in Boston. Let's think about somebody from Detroit. Maybe we'll ping Dan Wetzel. Maybe we'll ping somebody in that region that covers the team, because I want to hear what people are saying about that. Jim Harbaugh, by the way, it's a little bit like New York teams and Boston teams. New York teams, when they're bad, it's fun. Sports are really fun when New York teams are bad, right? It's kind of a joke. Boston teams, when they're bad, you really want them to lose, right? Because there's something about a Boston fan that just doesn't come across as good-natured. Now, Boston people hearing me say that, wait a minute, like New York's good-natured? The Jets and the Mets are so awful every year that it's entertaining. And the Giants are in that category too. I just have that feel because, I've spent a lot of time in New York, spent some time in Boston. I actively root against the Patriots. All right. But it's fun, and I got to admit, I have to admit, I'm going to get back to the Notre Dame schedule in a second. I'm asking you, all right, when the Buccaneers were kicking that field goal, I was in my car and I was listening to the broadcast and I was thinking, please make it. Please make it. Please beat the Giants, because I know it's infinitely more entertaining for what I do for my job and to watch Giants fans and their tweets hurtle through space, hurtle down my timeline. It's just hilarious because of the way the sports media inject Schadenfreude constantly into the coverage. It's so much fun. You don't get that with the Boston media. The Boston media, the reason that you have Antonio Brown on the Patriots and nobody says a damn thing is they're homers. And you can't necessarily blame the Boston media for being homers because they've never won anything until the last decade or two, right? Nothing. Red Sox, Patriots, disaster. Now the Celtics, yeah, that's different. That sport doesn't necessarily have the national footprint that the NFL and Major League Baseball has had in the past. And of course, the Red Sox being perennially bad is what defined that franchise, just like the Cubs. So when they started to win, hey, it's fine, good. Come back from 3-0 down. Wonderful. But then, they keep winning. Jesus. And then they become insufferable. So we've had an overcorrection of winning, I think, in Boston. So I'm trying to kind of explain myself and why would I root for the Buccaneers to make that field goal against the Giants yesterday, even in the context of Daniel Jones, because I just love it. It's hilarious. It's funny. It's fun to watch Andrew Marchand. It's entertainment. It's comedy. God knows we need comedy. Boston, there's no comedy. You just want them to lose. That's it. And then just shut the door on just shut the door on those guys. We don't have to listen to them anymore, right? And in defense of Boston sports, look, if New York, let's face it, Yankees fans are insufferable. They're insufferable, but they're not as Boston fans right now. This is the way I would characterize it. Boston fans are nouveau riche, right? Whereas Yankee fans aren't. They expect to win. All right. Now, there's obviously this insufferable arrogance from Yankee fans, right? But Boston fans throw it in your face. So, but you don't necessarily get that from Giants, Jets, Mets. And that's what makes it fun. That's what I really enjoy. And you have the hyper coverage in New York, right? So getting back to Jim Harbaugh, because Jim Harbaugh is kind of in this category too, as far as I'm concerned. Jim Harbaugh is a guy you just enjoy rooting against because he's such a bad guy. You've got Notre Dame playing at Michigan October 26th. Then Notre Dame plays at home against Virginia Tech. Then Notre Dame plays at Duke. Then they play at home against Navy. Then at home against, I'm not making these up, Boston College. Then we go to Stanford. That's their schedule. So if they don't win or play the way they played Saturday in Athens, they've got no chance, Notre Dame, to make the playoff, right? But they played great, and they had a chance to win. And I'm looking down at the comments. I appreciate it, Cam, and I'm going to take a look at those. I'm like so caught up in what I'm doing right now, trying to give you guys this information. So they're in a position now where that's as easy as a schedule as you can. Now, they schedule that thing out decades in advance. I understand that. And there are years where some of those programs are pretty damn good. So it's not like it was designed that way 15 minutes ago. But congratulations to Notre Dame. Now, this is all in the context of Urban Meyer. And I'm going to get to some of your questions here, Tennessee fans, here in a second. And I'm going to answer a couple from some of the people like Davis, Travis, let's see, Brody. We'll get to you guys. Brody, I'm going to get to your question, your comment, all right? I've got great questions from Tennessee fans already. So we'll get to that. We got a guest coming up. I want you to stick with me because I was caught up in my monologue, wasn't looking at the comments. There's a new show. We're only in the 4th week. Bear with me. But I can guarantee you we're going to have time where I'm going to take your questions and I'm going to elucidate you on the situation at Tennessee and other places. But why am I talking about Notre Dame? I'm talking about Notre Dame, first of all, because it's interesting, but also because Urban Meyer. I think Urban Meyer is going to end up at Notre Dame. Why do I say that? Doug Lesmerises, who was with us last week, and I put some clips up about him on my timeline at SportsbyBrooks on Twitter. Doug Lesmerises said to me that Urban Meyer invoked Mac Brown to him during an interview they did 2 weeks ago. Invoked Mac Brown in the context of talking about his career and the future. All right. We've got a guy from Ohio coming up, actually, from Cleveland, Ken Carman. He's coming up here in a second. And I'm going to ask him briefly about Urban when we get done talking about the Browns, because the Browns are arguably the number one story in the country right now. And Ken Carman hosts the pregame show for the Browns. And he's the number one drive time guy in Morning Drive in Cleveland, does a great job. So we're going to have Ken Carman here in a bit, hopefully. And so a great guest to have. So you should stick around. This is going to be great stuff. And we have more coming up. But in the case of Urban Meyer, I think when you hear the Mac Brown invocation, what does that tell you? Well, Mac Brown hung around, but he's an old guy. Waited for a long time. Now he's at North Carolina. What about waiting? Brian Kelly eventually retires. We've heard whispers about it. It's a possibility. Who knows? Even though they played one of their better games in his coaching career, I think, last Saturday. So that program may actually be on the rise. But what about Urban waiting, and when Kelly gives way or when Kelly falls down and still at Notre Dame, wears out his welcome, Urban slides into South Bend? I think it could very well happen. I think that's what's going to happen. He's not going to go to USC. My sources tell me he's not. So now let's go out to Cleveland and talk to a guy who, like our guest earlier, Chris Gasper, the Boston Globe, has his hand on the pulse of the Cleveland Browns, and the Browns are the talk of national sports media. Ken, you guys are in the eye of the storm right now today.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's wild. It's absolutely wild. I'm disappointed in the play calling. I'm disappointed in the coaching. I think that if a veteran coach was coaching the Browns last night, I think they would have won that football game. I think Baker Mayfield's antsy because of the bad offensive line play. I know things need to gel, but I'm not sure about the patience. I think this is very difficult for them right now.
What about Baker Mayfield? I'm hearing some criticism in the national media about just his ability, not stepping up in the pocket, not being aware. What are you seeing?
It's weird because he did it last year, and he was perfectly fine with moving up in that pocket and getting guys to bite. He doesn't want to do so now. He's because that offensive line, he knows that offensive line is not good. I think it's made him skittish, and I think that's had a huge impact on his play. He always moves right, and so when you're moving right, that's a habit. And guys go back to old habits when things aren't going well, when you're uncomfortable. And I think that that's really bothering him. I think the entire scheme lends itself to dysfunction. Now, they put together a couple of drives last night. The weirdest thing is they did have a couple of nice drives. That's how bad the offense was in the first couple of games of the season. But it feels for a lot of fans like they got close and they should have won that game. I don't know if they should have. The Rams are a really good team. But you can't have this type of offense if you're going to try to go to the playoffs. Their defense was great, but this offense is abysmal right now.
Visiting with Ken Carman in Cleveland on 92.3, does Morning Drive on the Fan. What about the injury situation? Because some people have mentioned that. Some people haven't. I mean, how much of an impact was that on the game?
I don't think so. I mean, their entire secondary was out, and their secondary played pretty well. Because they've had a deep secondary. A couple of the guys who were starting last night started at the beginning of the season last year. So they've been pretty deep in that secondary. I think that no one's going to feel bad for you on your injuries unless your quarterback gets hurt. So there's a lot of teams that have a lot of injuries, and you can lose some things, obviously, and lose some games because of injuries. But if you have what you see as your franchise quarterback, you really shouldn't have a big problem with that. At least I can't use that as an overwhelming excuse.
How much rope do you think they're going to give Freddie Kitchens?
I hope at least the year. I hope so. It's weird. Steve Wilks, when he was hired, I defended Steve Wilks in Arizona just because I thought, and the only reason I defended him was because I didn't pay that close of attention to the Cardinals, but I thought, and if you hire a guy and fire him in 1 year, I look at the guy who hired you. I don't really look at the guy you fired. And so I'd have to do the same thing with John Dorsey. Yeah, I think John Dorsey in a lot of ways has done a very good job in building this football team. But, a young quarterback needs a coach that's going to cultivate him. And it gets easier as time goes on for a veteran, but he needs a coach that's going to help him out. And you can see, and I think we are seeing in a situation right now, just how much coaching can get in the way of a young guy.
Well, what about, this may be a stupid question, but what about ownership with the Browns? What about Haslam? Is this a possibility of injecting itself into the shelf life?
I hope not. I hope not. I hope that if I'm sure John's not thrilled to be being 1-2. This is a big game coming up this week against the Ravens. You get to 2-2, it calms a lot of people down because it's almost the same way as the Rams. You got to play well to beat the Ravens. The Ravens are very well coached. I tell you what, if John Harbaugh was the head coach, they'd be 2-1 right now. You got to play.
Now, when you say that, just give me a quick thumbnail. When you say, what would be the difference here? What are the
penalties? Great, less penalties. They had 18 against the Titans. Is sloppy. You would not come out week 1 with the Titans and do that. I think your offensive line would be schemed better. I wonder if a little bit of Todd Monken's working against them because they've mixed in Todd Monken, and we had a caller who brought this up earlier today, and it made me think. It was a caller who brought it up because a lot of people are going, well, what's Todd Monken's role? What's he really doing? Where Todd Monken was known with Jameis Winston, vertical, and that's all they're doing now. I mean, these are long routes that they're drawing up, and it's not the slants, it's not the quick hitters that they were able to do last year. They had on a couple of big shots last year, but really it was methodically moving the football down the field. They're not doing that as much, and I wonder what the real influence is. I wonder if Todd Monken's offense is trying to be mixed in with Freddie Kitchens' play calling, and it's leading to some problems there. But I think it would be more streamlined. I think they get out of the huddle before there was 8 seconds left on the play clock regularly. Again, the penalties, I think they'd be much more disciplined. But now I look at John Harbaugh as an experienced head coach, so that would obviously be a difference. I think a guy who has some experience would probably be a lot better off. Right now, I hate to say it because I think he's a really good guy, but so far it looks like he is in over his head talking about Freddie Kitchens.
Talk to Ken Carman of 92.3, The Fan in Cleveland. And when you talk about vertical, OBJ comes to mind. But it sounds like what you're saying is maybe that philosophy is already in place and that Odell Beckham isn't necessarily something that is dictating that sort of vertical play calling.
Well, you can go. The best thing about Odell is you can go either way. I mean, you can run short slants, you can run slip screens, you can do anything with him.
That's how he's been successful, particularly this year.
Yeah, I mean, he can make any play that there is. So I think that with him, I think the first couple of games they were force feeding him a little bit. I think they went away from that yesterday. I think that he can do a whole lot for your offense, but I don't know if they know really what to do just yet. They got pieces. They played well in a lot of ways against the Rams, but when this offense is off schedule and you have the type of problems that they've had across the offensive line now with the injuries, these are not things that lead to a lot of wins. And the upsetting thing, I think, to a lot of fans is that through all that, they did have a chance to tie that football game up last night, and they did have a chance to even win that football game last night, and they weren't able to do it. And I think that's a huge difference. I think that maybe we'd still be talking today, but it'd be under a much different circumstance, because if you win that game last night on the national spotlight, I think the conversation's different today. I think the conversation around Freddie and Baker is different today, and about where the future of the franchise is. Now, you look at some of these losses that pile up, it's not going to get any easier before the bye week, and then right after the bye week, you have the Patriots. So, and that's at Gillette, so that's really difficult. I think for them, they need to keep their head above water at eye level before they get until after that Patriots game. Then the schedule really opens up for them. But they have so much that they still need to work on offensively.
What about the personality of Baker Mayfield? That in looking at Freddie Kitchen, I'm on the outside. You're on the. That's why you're on here today. But my perception is that Freddie Kitchens is a guy that really has deferred to Baker over time. And maybe is it time to give Baker Mayfield a little tough love from that coaching staff, or is he? I mean, what? Just take us into the mind of Baker Mayfield. Where do you think he is, and just what you think of the situation with him?
I think Baker's frustrated, obviously, with his own play. I think he thought that this season was going to be much easier than what it had started off with right now. He's very confident in himself. But I also do believe that there maybe has been Baker's always he's always done it his own way, and he's always been able to come out on top. Now it's not really that way. He's got to answer this challenge. And I think that Freddie has to answer that challenge with him. And right now, I think that Freddie is, again, the play calling with the type of offense, I don't know if it mixes. And I think that that's putting more on Baker Mayfield, where he's more trying to play hero ball, and then he is flushed out when he really shouldn't be flushed out of that pocket. And so this is 3 straight games we've seen this year. This is very, very difficult for them to deal with. And so they're going to have to get it going again coming up against Baltimore next week, because there was a couple of flashes against the Rams. But that is going to win you. Just hoping and praying ain't going to win you many football games. Go ahead, because I still think, Brooks, I think that Baker should have still his latitude. He still should have it. But I think that it's making people a little bit nervous, because I do think that you have a couple of things that are working against each other here when it comes to philosophy and what he's actually good at. Sorry, go ahead.
You know what I'm hearing here, and some people have said, well, we're looking at 1-6, but obviously the schedule is very, very difficult either way. And if this sort of thing continues, I think we're foreshadowing a staff change, and it's not Freddie.
It's been, which way are you thinking here?
Well, just the guy you invoked earlier.
Todd Monken.
Yeah. I think
possible. That's possible. I can never say no. You go back to last year, Todd Haley and Hugh Jackson had problems philosophically, and there was bitterness there, jealousy on Hugh Jackson's part. I don't know if there's jealousy and bitterness or anything like that. I haven't heard anything to that nature. But
it's just not working, thoh. I mean, Dorsey's got it.
So far, it's not. And I know they're 3 games into it, so it seems to be a bit of an overreaction. But this is a team that has big time goals, and so far they're not meeting those big time goals. And again, yesterday was a game that they didn't get blown out by 30, and then we could just look around and go, what do you do? What's going on here?
Right.
That's a tight football game, and they had chances. Jared Goff wasn't that great. They stopped Todd Gurley. You mentioned the injuries. That secondary was basically new, with the exception of those guys that started last year. They played really, really well, and the offense, with the exception of a couple of drives, really got shut off and didn't hold up their end of the bargain.
What do you think about the Rams? What was your takeaway with them?
I'm sorry, the Rams?
You just mentioned the Rams, I know, but I want to hear your overall, because I'm just telling you right now, I'm probably the only guy in LA, but I'm not all that. I'm not all that about the Rams right now.
Really?
I think that they're set up for a fall. I'm like the only guy in the city, but they have not been overly. You go all the way back to after the Kansas City game. This is a function of Cooper Kupp. This offense, they lose Cooper Kupp the week before the Kansas City game. Kansas City last year plays no defense. They had the big game, but then after that, they have not played well, save against poor defenses. For the most part, they played some tight games, but I think it still remains to be seen. We haven't really gotten a real feel for this Rams team. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy.
Well, no, because you're bound to start off struggling since you were in a Super Bowl and there's always that malaise.
Right.
And they have not been hot. They have not been hot
yet. That's the way to put it. That's the way to put it.
I'm sorry?
That's the way to put it. They haven't been hot.
Yeah.
They haven't exploded.
I can't imagine them getting worse, though, throughout the year. I just can't.
They're playing all these tight games. That's the thing. They keep playing tight games. And when you look back to after the Kansas City game, the only time that they got hot is when they played the Cardinals and the 49ers at the end of last season. Outside of those two games, Goff's numbers are very pedestrian.
Well, I thought going back, and it's easy to sit there and critique a Super Bowl for crying out loud, but I think it's a little bit alarming to me. I think he physically has what it takes, and I think he can make all the throws. I hate saying it because it's just such a throwaway term. I think that when you see him play physically, he's got it. But it concerns me that Sean McVay has to be so hands-on with him that there's very little change. There's very little audibly going on. That Sean McVay, and I am convinced Sean McVay is on a different level of thinking than a lot of coaches. I think it's a little bit concerning that everything is in his head for that because Wade Phillips is a fantastic defensive coordinator, and I'm a fan of Wade Phillips tremendously. But he can only do it for so long. And so if Wade Phillips steps away, what's that do for the offense? Because now you might have to compensate for the defense. That puts more on Sean McVay, which in turn should put more on Jared Goff. And we're on year 4 or 3 of Jared. 4?
It's 4? Actually year 4, I think.
I thought so.
Yeah.
We're in year 4.
And look, he owes his entire career. He owes that $110 million to McVay, who single-handedly saved his career. Yeah. And listen, you said it. If there's ever been a system quarterback, it's Jared Goff.
Yeah. I'm nervous about just like they're saying, and this is what concerns me so much about last year with Baker. It seemed like he got it. He was able to check out of certain reads, certain things. Even his hands were different pre-snap. He knew that things were coming. And I think there's almost too much on Baker. And in contrast, there's not enough on Jared Goff. And I think that in those two situations, I think the Rams are better off because they've been doing it for 3 years. But I think for the Browns, they're 3 weeks in, and that's why I was impressed by the way they played, with the exception of that offense. I was impressed with what they had done yesterday. I think that they need to take that next step, and they need to clear the air. Speaking about the Browns here real quick, they need to clear the air because there's a lot of stink going on because they were terrible before, and a lot of people say, well, you didn't beat anybody. Well, you weren't anybody before that. They need a win against the Ravens. They need a win against the 49ers. They need a win. 49ers might be seen a little differently still. They need a win against the Seahawks. They need a win against somebody who people take seriously. And they had a chance against the Rams yesterday, and they lost that chance. That's interesting how you say that, though, because what to you is a fall for them? Well, what's the fall?
Well, as far as the Rams go, I think the Gurley, I think first of all, the idea of what we're talking about, how Goff is too locked in with McVay, and then we saw what Belichick did, right, in the Super Bowl and how they were exposed. And then I think Gurley is a guy who could go at any moment. That's a terminal situation. It's not necessarily going to get any better. Yeah. And what alternatives do they have right now? So I think when you look back to just look at the data, there's no explosion offensively. They were the high-flying Rams through the Kansas City game. But since then, they've won close games, right? They have not, I think that they're sitting on a cliff. And I like Seattle. I like San Francisco. It's no longer a cakewalk in that division, even though a lot of people don't like Seattle. I still like Seattle. And if they could ever get some coaching, they could ever figure out what the hell they're doing, because I don't think they were ready to play yesterday. Russell Wilson, to me, I love Russell Wilson. He's kind of the opposite of Jared Goff.
I thought for a second you were going to say you didn't like Russell Wilson. I was like, oh.
No, I love him. But I think the key to the Rams, and here's the thing. Think about this. Think about the Rams' victories when they've had Cooper Kupp this year and how integral this security blanket guy is to that offense. Should it really be that way? I mean, first of all, you've got the best vertical, you've got the best triplets wide receiver group in Robert Woods and Cook. You know what I'm saying? But it's Cooper Kupp who's triggering that offense, and that's Goff. That's his security blanket.
In our situation, it's interesting you bring that up because, well, yeah, because when we had Rashard Higgins, who was out again, and then Antonio Callaway, who's suspended, we got people going, well, how much does he miss Antonio Callaway and Rashard Higgins? I'm thinking, you paid Jarvis Landry a ton of money. You paid Odell Beckham Jr. a ton of money. That doesn't wash. So if we're worried about a security blanket being there, then I think that we have bigger problems with that quarterback. Than I think that goes in with what you're saying about Cooper Kupp.
Well, and I think specifically when you look at the statistic, I keep saying this, I know, over and over again, but after the Kansas City game, which was kind of an aberration last year at the Coliseum, and that was without Kupp. After that game, Jared Goff, you look at his numbers, they're nowhere close to where they were in the first half of last season through week 10 as to what he's done so far. And when he has had success statistically, it has been a function of Kupp, not Woods, not Cooks per se, when I think it should be more so. And then you've got Gurley, who's just not the same guy. So
I know you're in LA, but I haven't paid that. I thought I paid close.
I'm the only person that's saying that, by the way. I'm getting murdered for that.
No. Well, if it ends up being true, it ends up being true. A lot of people, they want to think things are good, and everybody wants to believe they have a franchise quarterback. So I'm telling you right now, if I were in LA, I know how I am emotionally. I would fight you on it. I would try to fight you on it. I do the same thing with the Browns and Baker here. I want Baker to work out desperately. People always think this is – I was just talking about this. I feel horrible when they lose because I feel like I did something wrong because I want them to do well, and the fans are going to call up and they're going to be angry about it, and they were angry about it today, and it just is the worst. Right. The whole some guys I'm sure believe it, but the whole preconceived notion about how losses are better for you, as someone who's been through a season of 0-16 and 1-15 before that, it is not. It is not. So I know I am. I like positivity, so I might fight you on that if I were closer to it. But I'm learning over here. I'm learning.
Yeah, let's keep an eye out. And I think this division out here is the most intriguing division in the NFL. Man, here's the thing, Ken. Man, you did the pregame show. I saw you on YouTube Live. You did your long pregame show. Then you got up this morning, and God knows is nightmare, to deal with. And then you did this unbelievable effort, man. I can't thank you enough for jumping on.
It's just sitting on ass and talking trash. Can I ask you a question right before?
Yeah, sure.
You don't think that was a signature win by Clay Helton?
No, absolutely not. No, in the context of how the alumni feel out here. Yeah. And you've got to go to Washington. You've got to go play at Notre Dame. And Utah is Utah. So no matter how good, I mean, if Utah was ranked number 1 and they were a dominant team, great. But Clay Helton's not going to make it.
I said that.
And they're not, because that team is not buttoned up. It's not disciplined to the extent that it should be. A great example is the BYU loss. Washington had no problem dispatching them last week. And look, I'm making predictions here. I know. But the idea that Utah win is going to be a big factor in him keeping his job if they win 7-8 games, that's a fantasy. In fact, I'll tell you, if they get blown out, and I'm putting a number on it, by over 5 touchdowns, and I'm not saying it's going to happen. It probably won't happen. No, but that's the kind of place where you go to Washington. Who knows what's going to happen? But if they get really blown out, I could see him being let go by the bye week. That sounds crazy and nuts.
Well, who's going to fire him? They don't even have an AD, do they?
The same person that fired Lynn Swann. Carol Folt, the president. Carol Folt, the president. Then there's a new sheriff in town. She has cleaned house in the USC faculty and personnel that was involved in all. They're doling out, Ken, $500 million to the victims of sexual assault from a gynecologist rung amok in the faculty. They're right in the middle of the college admissions scandal, which I might add ensnares the football team. And the Department of Justice has left the names out of the staffers in their reports on the USC football team and staff that were involved in that. So the idea that, I mean, Carol Folt, that's who fired Lynn Swann. And I'll say this, the whale donors, the big donors who have always run the school, now they're backpedaling and they're falling into line. And the key to this whole thing is a guy named Rick Caruso, the chairman of the board of trustees at USC. I know for a fact he's fallen into line. He's the guy that basically runs the school and hires and fires the coaches.
Yeah.
He is the guy who's going to be involved, and he has fallen in line with Carol Folt. So, it's like Notre Dame. It's just so I just think it's amazing because I don't think Urban Meyer's going to take that job.
I wish he would so badly.
Oh God, tell me about
root for it on Saturdays.
Oh my God, it would be orgasmic if he took that job.
God,
because it's such a great job.
Brooks, and I hope I don't run over with you too much. There are people here who believe that Urban wouldn't recruit in Ohio as some sort of a thing, and I go like, well, we'll be good with Ohio. We won't recruit in Ohio. I'm like, man, because the thought is, well, he has so many good recruits out there in California. He doesn't need to recruit in Ohio. And I'm thinking, you guys don't get it. Urban Meyer wants all the recruits. If he has a 1 and 2 and a shot at both, he's going to go after both of them. So if it's in Wellington, Ohio, or if it's in Columbus, he's going to go after that guy to go to USC. He don't give a damn. And I think just Urban Meyer and USC and Ryan Day and Ohio State and a college football playoff is something I want to talk about someday.
Is he for real? I mean, we still don't. When does Ohio State play their first game, by the way?
Well, your guess is as good as me, but I've seen them. It's weird. I think that last year certainly was a distraction with everything else going on. I think it was a distraction to the players. They've really been more button up than I thought they'd be with Ryan Day. Even though there's not much you can glean off a 75-6 win or whatever the hell it was. I think
the UC game though. I think the UC game. I don't know if they're down this year. Well, they beat UCLA.
Yeah. Well, UCLA is not much. They've been more button up than I've ever seen. Justin Fields is really, 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 really good, and Chase Young's really good. I think Chase Young's going to be better than the Bosa's just because I hope he won't get injured. That's a knock on wood. So I think they're a really good football team, and we'll see what they do. We'll see what they do in the Big Ten schedule because I know they already beat Indiana, and they just beat them crazily. But I'm wondering if we're around that corner. They're going to have a tough game here and there, and before they quit on Urban. They did that against Purdue. They did that the year before over at Iowa. They got embarrassed. They've quit on him before. I want to know if they are willing to actually dig and go out and beat an opponent that comes out and punches them in the mouth because it's going to happen at one of these points this year, and we'll see if they actually do that.
I'm wondering, though, who is it on their schedule is going to actually punt? Maybe Wisconsin. They've got Wisconsin this year, right?
I thought they might.
Have to look. Hey, thanks so much, man. We got to do this again. This is awesome.
Oh, I was so excited when I got the DM to come on the show, and I'm so glad we were able to. Yeah, they do have Wisconsin, by the way, at home. I was so excited. This really is a pleasure and an honor for me. So thank you very much.
You can. All right, that's Ken Carman, 92.3 The Fan in Cleveland, and he is a fixture. He is the number one morning drive guy in Cleveland, and great talk at Ohio State football with him too, and USC football. And obviously, there's a tremendous interest. It may have seemed weird. The interest that he had, particularly in USC, guys in Cleveland, well, it's Urban Meyer. Urban Meyer is the biggest story, splashed on the sports page to this day. His whereabouts, what he's doing. He's still got roots there. That's where he's from. And people are wondering what's going to happen. And so that's what's neat about this show because we know, I told you, he's not going to USC. He's not going to take that job. And we got some intel, I think, on this show last week from Doug Lesmerises, and I put some of the clips on my timeline. By the way, I'm going to get to, before I sign off, I'm going to address some of the comments and the questions that Tennessee fans have about Jeremy Pruitt, about Peyton Manning, who I named earlier today, as someone who's canvassing candidates actively right now. Sources have told me that. All right, we'll get back to that. But first, we're going to go out to Charlotte, and we're going to talk to a guy covering the team for the paper of record in Charlotte. He is the Carolina Panthers beat reporter, and he was at the game yesterday. Brendan Marks is with us, and, of course, Brendan is at the stadium today. How you doing, Brendan?
I'm doing well. I'm really tired. I hope you guys excuse the bags under my
Oh,
eyes.
dude.
It was a late red eye, but we're doing good here in Charlotte.
Yeah, everybody's tired, with these late games. And then, of course, you had to fly. So tell us about your schedule after the game, or just tell about your schedule yesterday.
Yeah, it was brutal. So our internal clocks are still a little screwed up yesterday morning because we get in on Saturdays before Sunday games. So get to the stadium at around 10 in the morning or so. Game starts at 1:05. End up leaving the stadium around 7:38 when we're done with all of our work and everything. Then go straight to the airport, work at the airport, file another story from the actual airport terminal right at the gate before we get boarded. Red-eye flight, 3 hours of sleep on the plane, get home at 6 o'clock, go home, crash for 2 hours, back to the stadium for early morning press conference here with Ron Rivera. So no rest for the weary, but that's what we signed up for.
So you just got the media availability from Ron Rivera. What came out of that?
Yeah, so the Panthers have already declared Cam Newton out for Week 4 against Houston. And really the big thing was, if you go back and watch that videotape of Ron Rivera speaking, he is hammering home the idea that there is no timetable for when Cam Newton is going to return to this football team. And that's sort of what I've been hearing. That's sort of becoming the standard expectation here. Initially, we were told, this is a day-to-day issue. That's not the case. This is something that's going to linger. This is something that's not going to be resolved after 1 week. And especially the way Kyle Allen played yesterday, you feel a little bit better about making that decision.
Well, and I've said this, and I've really said this forcefully, dating back to last season. I think Cam Newton has gotten a bad rap because his drop-off in performance is directly attributed to his injuries, and I think that's been given short shrift.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a guy who, listen, what were the two things Cam Newton was known for early in his career? Being able to throw the ball 100 yards and running. He's now dealing with a shoulder injury where he can't throw the ball.
And he suddenly can't play. He forgot how to play football, right?
No, I mean, these are the two biggest injuries to the two biggest parts of his game. Like, what do you expect from the guy? So the only issue is this something where he's not going to be able to recover from those injuries ever? That's, I think, where people are starting to get concerned. And I think that's a little dramatic. Probably the guy's 30 years old, has taken some hits, but let's pump the brakes a little bit. We're getting ahead of ourselves.
So I have a question, though, for a guy that's out there covering the team every day. Why did they continue to put Cam out, put him out there when he has the arm injury? Why are they soft selling the foot injury, which I believe they were? And now all of a sudden you've got the prospect of a good backup coming in and playing well. So all of a sudden everything's great. He's out indefinitely. Well, why did they continue? Is this a Ron Rivera coaching for his job? I mean, who was pushing him to continue to play? Was this a Cam thing?
There's a lot of it's sort of dual-fold. It doesn't go to just one person. Cam is one of those guys who, no matter if he's hurt or not, he's saying, put me in the game. Because he believes, and I mean, he showed in 2015, that was sort of the trump card for
him. Wait
him.
a minute, he only cares about himself, Brendan, right?
Right, of course.
Mom.
Jeez, what a lazy take. What a lazy, lousy take.
Yeah.
But Cam's one of those guys who he's like, look what I did in 2015. If I can do that, I can do it whenever I want. And that's obviously not the case, but he has that sort of almost irrational confidence in himself, which for a quarterback in the NFL, you probably need to have that level of self-belief. At the same time, that other thing you mentioned, Ron Rivera coaching for his job, definitely comes into play a little bit. Rivera is, I mean, it's unavoidable to say he's on the hot seat. Before yesterday, the Panthers were 1-9 in their last 10 games, went on a 7-game losing streak last year to completely fall out of playoff contention. The offensive line was sort of a mess. Everything fell apart at the end of last year. They're exposed on the Amazon show, All or Nothing. You can see all the cracks slowly growing and building. It was a situation where Ron's saying, okay, I can't afford to have a backup go out there and crap the bed for me. I mean, it was one of those situations where he believed a hobbled Cam was better than a full-strength backup, and as we saw yesterday, not the case.
But look what's happened now.
Right,
I mean, maybe you've got permanent damage in the arm. He's still not throwing to the extent that he was before. And what about that foot injury? Did you have an idea that it might have been worse when it happened?
Yeah, I mean, when he first had this foot injury, it happened in week 3 of the preseason against the Patriots. And that was his first time in a game since the middle of December because, again, they shut him down early last year. So this is his first time in a game. He plays 3 series and somehow manages to get hurt in like 11 snaps. That's very alarming. And the thing about when he first got hurt was the way doctors were looking at his foot. I'm no medical expert. I don't claim to be. But the way doctors were looking at his foot on the sideline, it looked like they may have been checking for a Lisfranc. which is obviously a much more serious injury than just a normal foot sprain. If that does end up being the case, then that's something that could end up taking weeks and weeks and maybe even months to recover. So if this does end up lingering, and I have a feeling that it's going to, I don't think this is a 1 week fix. You have to wonder about, is that something where eventually Cam Newton's going to have to go into the knife?
Well, as badly as he wants to play, is this something that could eventually turn into a Flacco Lamar Jackson scenario with Allen, or do you think they're gonna ride or die with Kyle Allen based on what we saw?
Here's the thing: Cam Newton's contract is structured as such that if the team wants to move on from him at the end of this year, he's only under contract through the end of next season, but he only carries $2 million in dead space. So if the team were to cut him in, say, March of next spring, they could save $19 million and only have $2 million in dead cap space. That's nothing. I mean, that is basically a freebie. And for someone who's supposed to be your franchise quarterback, that's pretty shocking. It really all sort of comes together. If the Panthers are in a situation where week 6, week 7, Cam's still not playing, and they're 1-6 or 1-7, and it's looking like the playoffs are not just an impossibility, but, we might need some serious changes around here. You could be looking at a situation where Ron Rivera is out, general manager Marty Herney is out, and Cam, because of the way of his contract, is out too. You turn the keys over to Kyle Allen for a year, and if that doesn't end up working out, you sort of start back at square one. So that's very much on the drawing board, and it's so strange because it's such a pivotal time for this franchise, like potentially shifting from era to era. And yet the guy who has been the hallmark of this era, Cam, is just watching it all on TV.
Well, and you alluded to it. What about, and we're talking to Brendan Marks. He's the beat reporter for the Carolina Panthers with the Charlotte Observer. As you could see, he's at the Carolina Panther media availability this morning after the win over the Cardinals. What about what you alluded to, new ownership? What does that inject a dynamic? Is that going to be an influence on this?
Absolutely, because last year when they have a new owner, he comes in and Ron Rivera, people forget, he's the 7th longest tenured head coach in the NFL. Like we forget he's been here for 9 years, and if he wins 2 more games, he'll actually he'll tie the franchise record for most wins. Tie John Fox, who was here for, again, 9 seasons. So, but when they went on that 7-game losing streak last year, new owner David Tepper had to sort of look and say, listen, do I give these guys a hall pass? Or do I sort of start over and scrap it and bring in the people I want? And because of the respect and basically the trust that Ron had earned in the past few years, Super Bowl, Cam's an MVP, 3 straight divisional titles, he basically said, listen, I'm going to give you one more shot. There's going to be a lot less patience if the results carry from last year over to this year. If they start losing games again, this is 100% a situation where not only would it make sense for a regime change, but that would, I think, start to become the expectation.
What are your thoughts about Kyle Allen?
He is an interesting guy. So he's the number 1 high school quarterback coming out. I mean, he goes to A&M, and everyone's thinking, okay, he's going to be the next Johnny Manziel. He's going to go out, he's going to win the Heisman, A&M's going to win 10 games a year, blah, 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 blah. Doesn't happen. Kyler Murray comes in. They rotate, which is such a weird thing to think about. It's crazy to think
A&M.
It's wild to think that Kevin Sumlin somehow had a Heisman winner and another NFL backup and got rid of both of them in the span of one offseason. That's
right.
Truly remarkable, Kevin Sumlin, in the worst way. But Kyle still has like the pure arm talent. I mean, he posted the 2nd best passer rating in team history in his 2nd career start. That counts for something. I mean, he's throwing the ball 50 yards downfield. Cam struggles to do that. I mean, he's mobile. He's extending plays, throwing off his back foot. He's accurate. Everything that Cam Newton was known for, Kyle Allen is doing now. Obviously not as much in the running game, but from a passing standpoint, he unlocked this offense. 38 points was their expectation coming into this year for every game. They had gone on 5 straight quarters without a touchdown before he came in. So definitely says something about what he was able to do immediately, right from the gun.
Is this a contender? Do you think the Panthers are a contender?
I don't think they're a contender. I think ultimately you're going to see a situation where, it only is going to take one bad game for the Kyle Allen honeymoon phase to come to an end. And I think it very well could be. They play Houston this week. Houston's a really good football team. Deshaun Watson absolutely can eviscerate this secondary. The Houston offensive line isn't great, but is it good enough to hold off the Panthers' pass rush? Probably. And their defense absolutely could get pressure on Kyle Allen. If he starts getting hit, those mistakes are going to come. And if he starts making mistakes, if they start losing games, This is a situation where, again, if it's week 7 and they're 1-6, why are you bringing Cam Newton back? What do you have still to play for at that point? Why
but you know Cam's going to push to come back based on the context you just set up for us.
Of course he is going to push to come back.
This could really be an ugly situation for the end of the season.
It's really not ideal.
And Rivera's not helping. He's not helping.
No, I mean, and like walking out of the press conference last week is such a bad look. Like, you know, these questions are coming and you're not prepared to say something or do anything. Cam was in an air boot all the way through Thursday of last week. He didn't practice at all. Of course he wasn't going to play. Just say that. Why are we playing these games? They came out and said today he's not going to play. If they had done that last week, this is not nearly as big a deal. But, yeah, it's shaping up to be a really ugly situation. And I for one, am glad I'm not Ron Rivera right now.
Well, Brendan, I appreciate it, man. Thanks. I know you're tired.
Yes,
really appreciate it dropping in.
Yes, I appreciate it. I'm exhausted. I'm going to go crash right now. But thanks so much for having me, Brooks, and good luck with the Tennessee fans.
I'm going to need it. I'm going to need it. All right, that's Brendan Marks of the Charlotte Observer. He covers the Carolina Panthers, nice enough to drop in. And Ken Carman and Brendan Marks both rubbing some dirt on it to join us here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. And we're going to go out and talk some more NFL here in a second. But I am going to get to, and I know I have some questions from people that we're going to try to get to, if I can ever get my computer straight here, as we are going to go, I believe, out and talk some Steelers football with David Todd, who hosts Fourth Quarter Live here at Sports by Brooks on Fancred. Let's see. Here we go. Yeah. Go ahead and send me another message, Cam. So the text box dropped off. I'm having trouble with the mouse here. Let me move this back a little bit. There we go. All right. Let's see. All right. So as we are getting ready to talk to David Todd, I want to look at a couple of comments. And Davis asks some of the comments that we have from people checking in during the show. If James Franklin goes to USC, where does Urban go? I already mentioned, I think he's going to go to Notre Dame eventually. I don't think he's going to force out Brian Kelly. I don't think Notre Dame's going to fire him. I think Urban eventually will probably land there. Let's see. Brody makes the comment about Tennessee. And we were talking about Jeremy Pruitt and the fact that he's probably going to be fired. Phil Fulmer is your athletic director now. He's been struggling. He may not make it either. Brody makes the comment, that's what happens when you let an alt-right blogger pick your coach at Tennessee. Now, who would Brody be referring to? An alt-right blogger pick the coach at Tennessee? Clay Travis, that's who he's talking about. Clay Travis is the guy who is given credit for blocking the hire of Greg Schiano. Now, does that mean that Greg Schiano would have been a great coach? I don't think so. Probably not. Based on what he did at Ohio State most recently, probably not. Might be a great recruiter for all I know, but they were horrible on defense. And, of course, his resume, not the greatest. Greg Schiano kind of made his bones at Rutgers and didn't do a whole lot since, including the National Football League. When you look at a couple of more questions here. Let's see. All right. Now we've got Ryan saying, Brooks, I'm going to go over on all of my predictions. Urban to USC, Stoops to Auburn, Pruitt fired, and let's see. Give me 1 second, guys. I've got so many questions coming in that it's scrolling down, but let me go back to this one. Ryan goes after me. Brooks, you've gone you're going to go over all of your stupid predictions. Urban to USC, Stoops to Auburn, Pruitt fired. Let's see. He's out here throwing stuff. Let's wait. Okay, I'm out here throwing stuff. Let's wait and see what happens. Apologize for that, guy. Well, Ryan, I just said Urban's not going to USC. I never said Bob Stoops is going to Auburn. I never said Jimmy Raines ever contacted him. Here's the thing. People talk about me being a yellow journalist or, not a real journalist. The people who are responding to me, including so-called journalists, they're the problem. They're the ones making things up about what I'm saying. I never said a word about Gus Malzahn's job security. Yet I've got people screaming and yelling at me in the main media with blue checks, making things up I did not say. So I was asked by one of these individuals over the weekend, can you give us a job security update for Gus Malzahn? Right. I'll give you a job security update for him and Clay Helton, right? After Auburn plays Alabama, they play LSU, and they play Georgia. Then I'll give you a job security update, because that's what Jimmy Rain, the booster at Auburn, is doing. He's setting up a contingency plan, and you'll evaluate Gus Malzahn's job security after those games. Nobody ever suggested, I never reported that Gus Malzahn was in trouble if Auburn had lost to Texas A&M, and Texas A&M stunk it up against Clemson. They clearly don't have a quarterback. They didn't have their running back. Understand, I'm not the yellow journalist. I'm not the bad guy. Read what I report. Believe your eyes. All right? People who are close to the Auburn program, Auburn fans, make their money off Auburn directly. They have a vested interest in shooting the messenger. When I come out and I scoop people, I guess I understand the pushback, but it's amazing how so many of the Auburn fans see. Here's the great irony, and we'll get to David Todd here shortly. We'll talk some Pittsburgh Steelers football in a second. But the great irony is that half the people who are ripping me about reporting just that Auburn is their number one booster is putting together a contingency plan that could include Bob Stoops, right? The people ripping me for that would welcome Bob Stoops to take over for Gus and want Gus fired. Yet, I report that. I never reported that Bob Stoops is campaigning for the job. Suddenly, Bob Stoops is on the radio in Houston screaming at me. Bob Stoops is upset at me for some reason, right? I didn't do anything. I never said Bob Stoops talked to Jimmy Rain about the Auburn job. I never said Bob Stoops is interested in the Auburn job. In fact, I don't think he is. He's not going to Auburn, right? So if that's your impression, it's the other people who are conflating things I didn't say. Look, at the end of the day, it's all personal with college football fans. You can't handle the truth because no one ever tells you the truth in the media. It's different than the NFL. It's different than the NBA, Major League Baseball. It's the one big commercial spectator sport where it's all ass kissing by the media because that's where their bread is buttered. When you look at ESPN, the primary culprits in this, ESPN makes their money on college football. That's what drives revenue at ESPN, more so than the NFL or baseball or anything else. It's college football. And what do? Nothing. You notice, you look at all of the pregame shows, postgame shows, where are all the college football insiders? They don't exist. They don't exist in college football. Why is that? Well, it's great for me because it's good for business. I've got a job. I've got opportunities because of that. It's a huge vacuum. There's no college football insiders, right? Except for me. And there's a few other guys, not many. Okay, let's go out to the Sports by Brooks Sports Celebrity Hotline here on Fancred. And we're going to talk to a guy who hosts a fourth quarter live show here on Fancred. For every Steelers game, if you're just joining us for the first time on Fancred, our mobile streaming app, we have a really cool thing that we do, especially during the NFL season. During fourth quarters, we have some of the experts around the NFL who host shows here on Fancred during live fourth quarter games, give you what they think about what's going on in the game. And David Todd is one of them. David, I really appreciate you taking the time. Thanks.
Hey, Brooks, good to be with you.
Sorry about me filibustering.
No, listen, I love listening to people talk about SEC football, college football, the Auburn program. I've been down there a couple times. It's they are crazed. In Pittsburgh, people think things are sports crazed, but you get down to SEC football and it's a different world.
it gets heated when I have Bob Stoops screaming at me through a radio show in Houston about something I never reported because it's been conflated by the sports journalists in Auburn. But that's par for the course. We're used to that. But I want to talk to you about the Steelers. And man, what a confusing kind of mess that team is right now.
Yeah, it's been an interesting 18 months, really. Everybody knows the Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown situations. And it was a situation coming into this season where you felt like, was this going to be an addition by subtraction? Having those two guys out of the organization. Le'Veon Bell was not a disruptive guy. He just wasn't around, right? He didn't play last year. So they dealt with that. James Conner had a pretty productive season. And what they got out of their backs last year was roughly equivalent to what Le'Veon Bell had given them the year before as a group. And it cost them, $14 million less. So there was some hope here that, the distraction of Antonio Brown, who, by the way, just for the record books, Antonio Brown was never a bad guy in Pittsburgh until the very end. He was a knucklehead at times, but he was there on game day. He was an unbelievable performer. He worked hard. Yep, he did some dumb things. But
now here's my question, David. Here's my question. That's a really interesting statement, and that's what I've thought. But we've actually had some people on this show who have contradicted that. And they've said he's always been about. I mean, what are your thoughts? I'm not saying you're not right.
Yeah, no,
what I'm saying is, what are your thoughts about some of the media out there who doesn't believe that, and they're not shy in telling you that he was always a bad guy?
Well, look, I think there are two things in terms of what's a bad guy. There's the social aspect of being a bad guy, being a jackass, and then there's the are you criminal? Are you doing things that are really over the
serious stuff? Serious,
yeah, right. The things that we're talking about now. Obviously, when we get into situations about sexual assault or anything like that, that's a whole different world of things that we all know where that stuff lies. But when we're talking about stupid stuff in the locker room or coming to camp in a hot air balloon or something, types of things he did in Pittsburgh, that to me wasn't disruptive. He was late for meetings. He did things like that. He was Mike Tomlin gave him a wide berth, certainly wider than the fan base knew and people, suspected, and didn't punish him for his silly celebratory touchdown things that would get penalties. That to me doesn't necessarily make you a bad guy. It makes you a selfish guy for sure. And he was definitely about his money, no doubt. But he delivered every week on the field. And at the end of the day, that's what he was getting paid to do, and he did it. But walking out on the team in week 17 last year was massively disruptive, and then we saw that stuff spiral out of control. And I didn't, look, I'm pretty close to all of this. I didn't foresee this going off the rails like this. Now, some people suspected it, and a lot of people want to say, oh, the guy got hit in the head in Cincinnati as CTE. It's amazing how far off the rails it's got. But in Pittsburgh, bringing it back to the Steelers, the hope was that this stuff would get, the addition by subtraction, that they had enough talent on the offensive side, that they added pieces to the defensive side, and things would kind of, take off from there. And, of course, that's not been the case. Roethlisberger wasn't very good before he got injured. Mason Rudolph made a decent accounting for himself in the Seattle game in the second half last week and then was terrible in the first half this week. Steelers weren't able to capitalize on, 4 first-half turnovers and then did some things late. Mason Rudolph made some plays in that second half, but the Steelers weren't able to do enough to come out with a win, and now you're 0-3, and the saving grace may be that the division is not as strong as maybe some people anticipate.
When I look back to the Fitzpatrick trade, and we don't know where the Steelers are going to be in the draft, but this is shaping up to be, and this is my opinion, one of the stronger quarterback drafts that we've had. When you look at a Burrow being out there, a Jake Fromm being out there, a Tua being out there, a Justin Herbert being out there, and Roethlisberger, obviously being up in age. Is that trade a statement that they're fully committed to Ben in the future?
Well, Ben is signed for a couple more years, so they made that movement in the offseason. Mason Rudolph was a third-round pick in the previous draft, and the one that the Steelers said they had a first-round grade on. So, read into that. Then they said that from the beginning. Read into that what you will, but they think Mason Rudolph is a guy who can play in this league. So we're certainly going to find that out. And the Steelers are going to have 2 options at the end of the season. You're going to see if Rudolph is good or not, and you're going to see if Ben is back, and then they'll figure it out. On the draft, the quarterback position, were the Steelers coming into the season, or even without Minka and Ben, are they a team that's going to pick in the top 5? They're off to a terrible start, but I don't think they're that bad. Once you get past Hebert and Tua, I don't know Herbert, I don't know where Fromm probably fits in that conversation. The rest of the crew, I don't know. But I don't think the Steelers were thinking that this is an offseason where they were going to find their quarterback, and their secondary has been so bad. And they get Minka, who was the 11th pick last year. They don't have to pay a signing bonus. They have him for 3 years for less than $6 million, and then that the 5th-year option because he was a first-round pick. So I like the trade. Sean Davis has been bad, and now Sean Davis is hurt and on IR, and that certainly contributed to them making that move to try to shore up that secondary. And then he was an influencer yesterday. Impacted 2 first-half turnovers, and a team that hasn't been able to create turnovers for a couple of years.
What about Mason Rudolph? What's your assessment from a long-term perspective from what you've seen so far?
I think Mason Rudolph is a guy who can play in this league. I didn't like the pick when they made it. I thought they had other needs. And it turns out, obviously if you have this injury, Josh Dobbs was not the answer. He was the guy the year before. They just moved to Jacksonville. Rudolph did first start in the NFL on the road in San Francisco with that defensive line, with the Steelers offensive line, who got worked, by the way, a very talented high-profile group offensive line, and I think they got worked by San Francisco's defense. I thought Rudolph made a reasonable accounting of himself, and the 2 big plays finally in the second half kind of hit Juju in stride for that crosser over the middle that set up the long touchdown. But the play I really liked that showed me something more, a sense of the offense, just after completing a pass interference play for about 30 yards, he set up a deep drop. Looked to the right, held the safety on the left hash, the safety's left hash, his right hash, and then came back to the 3rd-round pick this year, Donta Johnson, for an easy touchdown throw, which he put just the right amount of air under it, let him run under it. That, to me, was a play that showed that he had a bigger sense of what was going on. It wasn't a first-read thing. He knew what he wanted to do. He knew how to look the safety off. Those kinds of things in your first start, that's impressive.
Where are the Steelers in terms of overall talent?
I think that's the question nobody in Pittsburgh knows the answer to anymore. I think they think the defense, if you go by position, person by person, Brooks, and you look at Cam Hayward or Stephon Tuitt, who's had a great start to this season, you look at a lot of these guys are first-round picks, TJ Watt for sure. You say, look, there's some talent here, but they are just getting either out-schemed, they're just getting smoked on crossers and seam routes up the middle, and they haven't been able to stop this stuff for 3 or 4 years. So you think that, there's a big question about what is the talent on the defensive side of the ball. I think on the offensive side of the ball, people felt it was a very talented offense. Connor, was okay. He was a Pro Bowler last year. You've got Juju, who can feel like he can step into the number 1 role, but then you find out, the offensive line hasn't been good these first 3 weeks. The tight end, Vance McDonald, often injured tight end, was injured again yesterday. That takes another weapon out. And Donta Moncrief, who was the, mid-level free agent signing they had in the offseason. It was supposed to be a playmaker. It's been a disaster. They benched him after that drop last week, and I don't know that he'll ever see the field again for the Steelers. So they have not had anybody step up as a playmaker on the offensive side of the ball, and that hurt Ben, and it certainly hurt Mason so far as well.
Is Tomlin the kind of guy, or the front office, the type of situation we might see some staff changes?
I would be surprised if you saw it in season. People ask if Mike's, I always get asked, is Mike Tomlin in jeopardy? And there are a lot of people here who don't like Mike Tomlin. Never had a losing season. Whether you think that's a value or not when you're not winning playoff games, I don't know. But I don't think the Steelers are in a position where even if they went 4-12 this year, even if Roethlisberger had been the quarterback, I don't think Mike Tomlin was in a position to be fired. I'll be shocked if they have a disaster of a season here, if this plays out like this, if Keith Butler's back as defensive coordinator.
That's where I'm going. That's where I'm going.
Yeah. I mean, they've been together forever. It would surprise me. It would surprise me if he were.
Well, I think the level of expectation has plummeted, especially with Ben going out. So I think the resignation I can't speak to it. I'm not there. But when you look at Tomlin, you look at the stability of that organization, the reputation of that organization, so few head coaches, right? It just kind of goes against the grain, I think, of the culture of the organization to make a change in the middle of the year. Because particularly, I don't want to rule out that the Steelers are going to come back, but this does not look like a playoff team.
Well, look, they get the Bengals twice, they get Miami, they get the Jets. They got some games where that certainly should be winnable games. The most fortuitous thing, Brooks, that they have going right now is they're 0-3, but they've got 6 games left against the division and they haven't played any of them. And, obviously if they go 5-1 against the division, that kind of changes the picture going forward. So that's the hope and they'll start that Monday night against the Bengals at home. And if they were to lose that game, I think you will see a full on throw in the towel from the fan base. But yeah, no chance the organization will change coaches midstream here. 3 coaches since 1969. They are the opposite of knee jerk reacting to these types of things.
David, man, I appreciate you jumping on. Great information. Thank you so much.
Hey, Brooks, great stuff. I enjoy listening to you. Thanks for having me.
That's Fourth Quarter Live on Fancred's David Todd. He helps us with the Pittsburgh Steelers every single Sunday or whenever the Steelers are in action. You got to come on the Fancred app. We've got shows for, I know, the Patriots as well. We got a Fourth Quarter Live there. We got a Dallas Cowboys Fourth Quarter Live. We've had Jeff Kavanaugh, who's awesome. 105.3 The Fan and his dog Stomp Face and Molly. They were with us last Friday, I think it was. So every fourth quarter, you come on the Fancred. It's a really unique, cool thing that some of the biggest sports media personalities in those towns. And if you live in those towns, it's cool because you already know those people, right? But you can also jump in if you're from outside that city or you want your fix and you're a fan, just in general. You can come to the Fancred app. We have the Philadelphia Eagles as well. So it's a really cool principle. And of course, what we're doing here is unique and it's different. Boy, I hate that word unfiltered. It's the most overused word, Jesus, on shows. But this really is. It really is. And this show is not about confrontation. It's not about attacking people. I'm the one who's getting attacked, right? But I want to take a look at a couple of more comments and questions because we got like a big stack of them here before we go. And mostly about the Tennessee situation. By the way, tomorrow, we're going to have some information about Florida State you haven't heard. Brand new information, proprietary breaking information. Want you to come in. If you know anybody who's a Florida State fan, if you're a Florida State fan, you're going to get some information about that coaching situation. Good Lord, what a nightmare Willie Taggart, Florida State is. So Weldon makes the comment that John Reed led the charge against Sciano. Now, John Reed is a Tennessee sports radio personality. By the way, Cam, that's a guy we should take a look at. I want to look at Tony Basilio in Tennessee, and I want to look at John Reed, a couple of heavy hitters, in covering the Tennessee program. I really want to get everybody on here. We want to get a rotation of people. We want to take, it's like today, we were inside the stadium in Charlotte, Carolina Panthers, right? As Brandon Marks, who is the guy, the paper of record, Charlotte Observer, he's covering the team and he's covering the Panthers for us. Gave us some amazing information about what he thinks is going to happen, what's happening right now in terms of Cam Newton being ruled out for next week. That's breaking news. So John Reed leading the charge against Greg Schiano. Clay Travis has been credited to have a lot of impact on that, but I didn't know John Reed was also on that side. So Weldon, thanks for that information. Kevin, what are you hiding from us? He's asking me that. We want the nuggets of truth. Well, I'm giving you the truth, but I can't give you everything. I can't give you everything because I got sources, and I'll lose the sources if I give you everything. I'm giving you enough that it's relevant information. Now that you know the cavalry is on its way. I saw a comment earlier in the show from the very beginning from Zachary. He says, yeah, Peyton Manning doesn't give a you-know-what about the Tennessee program. Well, you're 100% wrong. He does. I know he's actively involved. So you're wrong, Zachary. Let's see. Davis asks, is there a contingency plan in the event of a Pruitt firing, or is a move imminent in your opinion? I'm glad you asked that question because it triggered something at another school that I'm going to bring up maybe as early as tomorrow or this week. But there is no contingency at Tennessee right now. And I would I would presume that Pruitt's going to last the season, that there's not going to be a change made. But I think there very well could be a change at the end of the season. I mean, this season is looking more and more like an unprecedented disaster in the history of Tennessee football. But we'll have to wait and see how it plays out. I think that the Florida game was really a tell to that extent, Davis. But he's saying, is there an imminent move? In my opinion, no, there isn't. Let's see. Let's see if we have any. I mean, we have so many. I just want to take one or two more. Let's see. Right. Travis asks, who is interested in the Tennessee job? I've gone through it before. Not as many people as you might think. Couple of different names you want to throw out here. I don't think James Franklin is going to Tennessee. There's virtually no chance. I think he's targeted the USC job. But Tennessee's a bad job. You've got fans who, with the great tradition of Tennessee football, and you've got good facilities there. They're under. I'm not somebody's going to kill Tennessee fans for having expectations. That's in part how you perpetuate a good program. Your fans hold you accountable. There's nothing wrong with that, right? I think that was one of the problems at Georgia. I'm a Georgia guy. Over the years, that I don't think Georgia fans have held our program accountable at all. When you look at our recruiting ground there in the state of Georgia and the immediate environs, and the fact that, Clemson and South Carolina were down for so many years. And of course, Alabama has been down off and on. Florida has been good for a long, long time for the most part, but Georgia should have been much, much better. And it's a credit to the fans. I think you could posit that it's the fans at Tennessee who played a large role in that program being as good as it's been over the years. Of course, they've had a great tradition with General Neyland, Robert Neyland and whatnot. Of course, that was a different era. But Tennessee fans have a very high opinion of the program, and they've earned it to an extent. But the reality is it's not a good place to recruit. And now you're in a perfect storm where you have Saban, you have Kirby, you have Dabo, right? Unprecedented, great recruiters, and you're on an island, and you don't have your own recruit. I mean, we're not talking about Nebraska, right? Or Iowa or North Dakota. Tennessee's not bad. You look at Nashville, particularly Memphis, that area, good recruiting there. But outside of that, it's a tough go. So when James Franklin is looking at the Tennessee job, he may get offered a lot of money potentially, but he's going to get offered a lot of money at USC. And USC, you got to be kidding me. First of all, the conference is a joke. So Franklin's not going to Tennessee. But this is my whole point, Kevin, or not Kevin. Who is it? We've got one more person that asked a question about who is interested in the job. And let me look at this one more time. It's Travis. Sorry about that, Travis. That's what I'm getting at here. Who's interested? There's some assistant coaches who are top assistant coaches who are interested. Jimmy Lake at Washington, possibility. Tony Elliott, offensive coordinator at Clemson. This is how bad it's got. I think somebody like a Jimmy Lake might be a possibility. I don't think Tony Elliott wants that job. I don't know, but why would the recruiting coordinator, who's probably the top assistant coach when it comes to being a head coaching candidate going into next season, somebody that schools are going to want to hire and look at, right? I have no doubt the USC is going to kick the tires on Tony Elliott. But why would Tony Elliott, who's the offensive coordinator and recruiting coordinator at Clemson under Dabo Swinney, why would he want that Tennessee job, right? Absent any other opportunities whatsoever in the prospect of them opening up at elite programs, maybe he looks at Tennessee, but I don't think even a Tony Elliott's going to look at Tennessee. That's a tough job. I mean, it's a little bit like South Carolina. Tough job. Will Muschamp, and I don't know if he has it in him as a coach. So we'll have to wait and see. But I'm going to have some more information for you, particularly about Florida State. We're going to have more information about USC, and I'm going to talk to you here throughout the week about USC, continue to, because, Urban Meyer's right in the middle of it, and the whole media, including a dummy like Paul Feinbaum. What a joke. The guy, I mean, it's one thing to not have any sort of breaking news, which he never does. He never tells you anything you don't already know. But does he watch Ohio State? Does he watch Michigan? And does he watch Michigan? Does he really have any clue what's going on? I mean, it's not hard to make a pronouncement about Michigan right now, but I don't know. It is what it is. That's why this show exists. I don't know why I'm complaining. I should be sending him a fruit bouquet or a fruit basket, a flower bouquet, right? So, man, this show went fast today. Great guests, starting with Chris Gasper of the Boston Globe. We had Ken Carman of 92.3 The Fan. We had Brandon Mark, Charlotte Observer, Carolina Panthers beat reporter, and we just had David Todd, who covers the Pittsburgh Steelers for us on a Fourth Quarter Live. here on the Fancred app. So again, fourth quarter NFL games, fourth quarter of the NFL games for the Patriots, for the Steelers, for the Eagles, and for the Cowboys, we have you covered. So when you've got that app on your phone, just jump in, man, and you're going to be able to hang out with your fellow fans in the fourth quarter of some of the NFL games of some of the biggest, most prominent teams in the National Football League. And so that's going to do it for today. But we'll be back tomorrow at noon Eastern time. We do this weekdays, Monday through Friday. That is weekdays. And so for our producer in Boston, Cam Smith, I'm Brooks Melchior saying so long from Los Angeles. This has been Sports by Brooks on Fancred.